I think when a lot of old fans think of ritual monsters, they think of cards like Relinquished and Magician of Black Chaos. And the show always portrayed them as these game-warping cards. But in reality, they were kind of bad. Even by old Yu-Gi-Oh standards, the investment and setup needed to ritual summon a monster was not worth the payoff. And there was a while at the beginning of the game where Konami just kind of forgot about the mechanic and pushed it under the rug. My memory of ritual summoning is actually back from 2010, with the Herald of Perfection. This was a ritual monster that not only had a good effect, but the ritual spell, Dawn of the Herald, could recycle one of the monsters that was used as material for the ritual summon, which back then was pretty crazy. And the deck performed well for a little bit, but ultimately it fell victim to the issues that ritual summoning just always has as a mechanic. And I know there's been other ritual dominant formats, like Necros, but I figured I just missed it and it's past its prime at this point. So when I got back in the Master Duel, I was pleasantly surprised to play against the Ritual deck. It was honestly a breath of fresh air to see such an old mechanic was still alive and kicking. And then I played against it again, but this time it had Ryziel in it. And then again, except it had Orcust in it. And this morning, except it had Yummy in it. And again with Centurion. And again with Tier Limits. And again with Snake Eyes. And again with Plants. You get the point. And while doom-scrolling the bowels of r/Master Duel at 2 a.m., as one does, I noticed a singular term being echoed that was being used to describe Mitsurugi, and that's called a slop engine. Which got me thinking, what is the role that these slop engines actually fill in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh? Are they as unhealthy as everyone makes it sound? And how did Mitsurugi turn what used to be the worst mechanic in the game to the most ubiquitous? So let's explore this together. So I'd actually like to start by looking at Mitsurugi in a vacuum. So Mitsurugi is honestly a really cool deck, themed around 3 legendary Japanese swords. And to the 0.2% Japanese viewers in my analytics, I'm really sorry, I'm about to butcher your language. But thematically, each of the Mitsurugi monsters come in pairs, where the ritual monsters have the respective name of the legendary swords. The level 4 counterparts use an alternate name of the sword. Their names are also appended with the phrase no Mikoto, which is an honorific used to refer to the gods. In this case, it's the gods that wielded these 3 legendary swords. And these legendary swords are the Kusanagi no Sugiri, represented by Kusanagi and Murakumo, the Futsu no Mitama no Sugiri, which is represented by Saji and Futsu, and the Ame no Habakiri, which is represented by Aramasa and Habakiri. The reptile theming is in reference to one of the more famous epics of Susanoo, where the god slayed an 8-headed serpent named Yamata no Orochi, and after slaying the beast, finding the Kusanagi no Sugiri inside of the beast's tail and then claiming it for himself. You can even see Konami's interpretation of the sword in Murakumo's artwork, which is a pretty neat touch, and the epic gets referenced through gameplay and the mechanic of ritual summoning itself as well. The things like the tributes for the ritual summon, for example, referencing the annual sacrifice of Ashinazushi and Tenazuchi's daughters to the river god, with the tribute effects possibly referencing what they gained in return for their sacrifices. And maybe it's just me, but I always think it's really cool how well thought out these themes are. But this actually brings us to the first issue that ritual summoning has that Mitsurugi fixed. And that's every single Mitsurugi monster has an effect that triggers when they're tributed, turning probably the biggest downside of ritual summoning into pure upside. But Konami didn't just stop there. Borrowing from how it seems like they modernized fusion summoning, Konami gave the deck a path to both ritual summon a monster from their deck, or use monsters in their deck as material for the ritual summon. On the same card, by the way. This helps circumvent ritual summoning's second biggest issue, which was the act of needing to gather the ritual monster, the ritual spell, and the tributes, all before you could even attempt to do the ritual summon, turning what was once a resource hog of a mechanic into a card-generating machine. And by itself, it's a pretty strong but fair strategy. But there's one seemingly important thing that a lot of people think Konami missed. And that's a lock on what you can or cannot summon after resolving most Mitsurugi cards. And so because of the deck's high level of flexibility, Mitsurugi found a home in basically any deck that could fit it in. And with a ton of extra deck cards that could act as an intermediary between the 2 decks, Habakiri was not only a full Mitsurugi combo, but the full combo of whatever deck you jammed in with it as well. And so people gave it the honorary name Slop Engine. But how sloppy is it? So I'd like to start this part of the discussion off by giving slop engines a proper definition. To me, these are full or partial decks with minimal summoning locks and flexible enough to act as a roundabout combo starter for a large number of other decks. And this isn't something that's unique to Mitsurugi. Things like Fiendsmith, Millennium, and Kashtira all also fall into this category as well. And I would even argue that the core concepts at play here aren't even unique to modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Since the beginning, the game has had cards like Sangin and Witch the Black Forest to act as intermediaries between your strategies. Later on in the game, this evolved into small self-contained packages. Needed a generic rank 3 or a quick tutor? Well, use the Tour Guide package. Your deck not have enough spot removal? Use the Fire and Ice Hand package. You like synchro summoning? Well, a small plant package wouldn't hurt at all. To me, these generic sub-engines are the natural evolution to the small self-contained packages that we had before it, where the whole point of it is really just to increase the power of any deck that it goes into. But this is 2026. Decks are now powerful, compact, and riddled with one-card starters. So a lot of people ask if Konami went too far with these generic sub-engines. So I decided to go on a little bit of a research binge and try to summarize both sides of the argument before coming to my own conclusions. So let's start with the people who defend the slop engines. By far the loudest and largest defense for this is that it props up older decks. And honestly, I do get it. So far in my journey, I've noticed power creep works a little differently in Yu-Gi-Oh! Than other card games. It's not just the raw abilities and stats of 1-drops and 2-drops getting better over time. Because what defines a meta deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not the end board, but instead the deck's ability to play through disruption and still end on something. Like if someone does a fully uninterrupted Speeder or Madolche combo, the best decks in the game are still going to really struggle to conquer that board. But the problem with those decks is their turn usually ends to one hand trap. So, enter the slop engine. Suddenly, your old but beloved deck has ways to bait out interaction, has alternate lines of play, and has alternate ways to start their combo. And I think it's a clever way to boost the power of a lot of old decks all at the same time, without Konami having to go back and create legacy support for 100 different decks. Plus, at least from what I've seen, Yu-Gi-Oh! Players tend to make a special bond with their favorite deck, more so than pretty much any other card game. And I'm sure each of you watching has a deck that you associate with yourself, even if the deck is a relic from the past. So it makes sense that engines like this excite players when they're able to lab it into their favorite deck. The second defense for it is that there's clear and noticeable trade-offs. Like, it might not be immediately obvious when your opponent is in the middle of comboing you into the sun, but each of these sub-engines come with their own bricks. The more engines you use, the higher likelihood you have of just drawing an unplayable hand. And over the course of 500 or 1,000 games, that consistency drop is noticeable. And the final defense is that using another engine comes at the cost of your non-engine. And I've even seen decks with so many engines that they can only fit Max C as their only hand trap, which creates a very feast or famine kind of playstyle. This is the kind of deck that just prays to go first, or hopes that their engine pile can break through a board that the opponent made basically uninterrupted. It's easy to have those moments where your opponent cycled through 5 different decks seared into your brain, but it's also just as easy to forget the times that they just set a card, passed, and scooped to the first starter you played. But let's jump to the other side of the argument now and give that a fair shake. And to start with the largest and loudest rebuttal I saw, is that slop engines like Mitsurugi are ruining deck identity. They don't see it as Mitsurugi boosting up a bunch of other decks. They see it as Mitsurugi taking over a bunch of other decks. And let's be honest, there's only so many times that you can watch full Mitsurugi combo just to find out what deck your opponent is actually playing, before you want to just throw your computer out a window. The second rebuttal is that these engines don't just support old decks, they support the new ones as well. You have decks like Yummy where every single monster is a 1-card combo, so you have people just throwing Mitsurugi in there because they have the room to. They can. And you might as well, right? It strengthens your end board. It takes 2 decks that are individually strong but fair, and makes going second against them feel a little bit like playing Go Fish. Like, you can perfectly time all of your interruption on your opponent's initial play, only for them to flash Habakiri at you, and end on the same board that they would have had if you never hand-trapped them in the first place. And that makes hand-traps feel less impactful, and for some people, borderline useless. And I sympathize with that feeling. The whole reason you put a card into your deck is because you want it to be impactful on the game. The whole reason you put a hand trap in your deck is because you expect it to at least slow them down a little bit. It's one thing if your hand trap gets negated by Called By or Crossout, But it's a whole other level of feels bad when your hand trap resolves, but basically got ignored because Habakiri was able to finish off the combo for some other deck. And are they running more bricks? Yeah, but they're also running a lot more one-card starters, so they can fire off their combo from any number of angles. And when you look at decks like Mitsurugi, Fiendsmith, Millennium, Kashtira, Gem Knight tier limit, you start to wonder if these engine piles are just getting a little too ridiculous. And so after examining both sides, where do I stand personally? And to be honest, it wasn't as cut and dry as I originally thought it would be. Both sides have some incredibly valid points. But to me, these engine piles aren't nearly as bad as people claim they are. While that more feast or famine kind of playstyle is not exactly my cup of tea, I still think it should exist for the players who enjoy it. And as far as it being everywhere, including inside of the best decks in the game, I just don't think it's as impactful as people make it seem. Like, if Konami went back and put a reptile lock on every single Mitsurugi card, players would just find the next best thing and abuse that instead. And then that would be the new boogeyman. Like, there's always going to be a best sub-engine. And I'm sure everyone is always going to point their pitchforks at that sub-engine. But when you take a step back, I don't think Mitsurugi is actually doing anything that's too egregious other than putting bodies on the field. Like, yeah, it has a quick speed Regeki, and it can set up an Omni negate. But I mean, that's all it's really doing other than putting up bodies. And personally, I think it's cool that it's able to shrink the power gap between fun decks and competitive decks just by existing, even if that means both decks are Habakiri all the way down. But what do you guys think? Do you think these slop engines like Mitsurugi and Fiendsmith fill a specific role within this game? And for what they are, not doing anything too egregious? Or do you think I missed a crucial point or overlooked something and think that these slop engines are bad for the health of the game? I'm actually really curious to see where you guys stand on this. But anyway, I'm George, and until next time, I hope you guys have a beautiful day. Love you guys. Bye.